Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back post-lunch. I welcome all of you to the next panel we have in store for you. The topic is role of high-risk, committed, collaborative, patient grant capital for unleashing innovations. So just I'll set up the panel a little bit for all of you. So social innovators are swimming against the tide on all counts that one can think about, be it access to funders, access to paying customers, or access to talent. So there is the need for extremely patient grant capital. And here I define grant capital as capital with zero commercial interest. And for the purpose of definition, we also define innovation as either a technology innovation, a product innovation, or a service delivery innovation, right? So on the panel today, we have funders and recipients of grant capital, of different types of grant capital. And the goal of the discussion is to arrive at possible collaboration amongst these stakeholders to give greater leverage for all of our efforts. So with that, I'll quickly introduce our panelists. So we have Madhav Joshi, who's the CEO of IHF, India Health Fund, an initiative of Tata Trust and the Global Fund, which aims to accelerate the control and elimination of communicable diseases. We have Naghma Mulla, CEO of EdelGive Foundation, the philanthropic initiative of EdelWise. Rajesh Krishnan, CEO of the Bangalore chapter of United Way, one of the oldest and largest privately funded charities in the world. We have Rizwan Koita, co-founder of CTS Tech, India's first healthcare unicorn and 25th unicorn, and co-founder and director at Koita Foundation. We have Sanjay Sarin, Vice President, Access and Country Programs at Find, a global non-profit working to accelerate equitable access to reliable diagnostics across the world. Sanjay Vijayakumar, co-founder Pupil First, an open source technology company which carries the mandate of AICTE to train both students and teachers on industry-ready curriculum, right? And the format of the discussion would be that I would pose questions to each of the panelists who would respond in around 5 to 6 minutes. First question is to Madhav. Madhav, today some of your portfolio companies have gone on to become unicorns, but at the time of your intervention or your support, they were early stage startups, right? So we'd love for you to tell us about what role grant capital has played in their journey. And because there is paucity of grant capital available, what did you do beyond the capital that helped accelerate some of these innovations?
Sure. No, thanks for that, Neetha. So India Health Fund was set up as a collaboration between Tata Trust and the Global Fund with the aim of de-risking promising technology to address challenges around communicable diseases. And the reason why communicable diseases were taken up was because this has been an area of market failure, where the capital and financing needed for development of technology has not been available, largely because of the public market nature of the patients and the problem. And private capital just hasn't seen the kind of returns that it expects. So that's where we came in. So coming to your question, the role that we have played has really been to identify solutions where there are working prototypes and basic data available, and used philanthropic capital to provide funding to complete development where no other forms of capital were available. In the absence of that, a lot of these solutions would have probably stayed in their labs. So that's really the role that we have played. And that role has gone beyond just funding. We provided the grant capital, but that grant capital has been supplemented to a very large extent by also enabling access to technical experts, a lot of whom are in this room, because it takes a village. We've also facilitated access to patients, to data, and to samples, which all of these solutions needed to complete their development work. And increasingly, we're seeing that there is also a need for market access, which has been one of our learnings. So that's something we're also enabling through our relationships and linkages. Now, the patience of the capital that we provide is really twofold. One is patience from the point of view of the duration of the capital itself. While, yes, everything we fund is for well-defined projects, very often science needs time, and we provide that flexibility. And the second thing that we also provide patience for is in terms of an evolution of the science. Very often, situations change, requirements of the end users change, and the trajectory of development also needs some adaptations. And that's particularly in the case of early stage solutions. So we provide all of that patience. And that's really helped a lot of these.
Thanks for that, Madhav. My next question is to Rizwan. So, Rizwan, you've built strong, resilient, for-profit companies in your avatar as a CEO. But now, as you begin your philanthropic journey, you've picked digital transformation of NGOs and digital health, which are higher risk, but non-linear risk-reward profile, right? Can you talk to us a little bit about that journey that you must have undergone while arriving at that decision? Because we've seen a lot of philanthropic players start their journey with innovation and then move to programmatic work. So would love to understand your thoughts, and also from your own experience, what do you think can be something that we can do as ecosystem partners to get more local philanthropists excited and energized about funding innovations?
Sure. So first of all, thank you very much to the ACT team to invite me here. I really look forward to the discussion through the day. My quick background, so as Neetha mentioned earlier, I've been involved almost per chance to be in the digital space, health space for the last 20 years. Largely focused on working with US and European customers, because that's where, if you look at the trajectory of digital health, it really took off in the mid 2000s, right? 2005, 2007, and it's kind of grown. India is kind of now starting to take off. So I've had the benefit of sort of being there and, in a sense, having seen the movie before. So at the end of 2021, when I was stepping down from my role as chief executive and wanted to spend more time in philanthropy, fortunately for me, that was also the time when, if you look at the success that India has had with UPI and Aadhaar and others, the focus is starting to now become more and more on the healthcare side with the Ayushman Bharat Digital Mission, the success of the CoWIN app, and many other things that have been sort of done quite well in India with respect to large-scale deployment of technology. And the advantage that I saw, that in addition to providing capital as a philanthropist, if I could marry that with some of the domain knowledge that I had gained through running my company, then I would be able to do more with a certain amount of capital, and especially if I put in my own time, then the impact that I could potentially generate, for the work that I did would be more. And the choice was to either start a ground up, an NGO and do it, or support some other NGO. But some of the most sort of at-scale problems in healthcare are actually done by the government. And strangely, just I felt more excited that this is sort of probably I was naive because I haven't done this before, so I'm probably the least experienced here. So I said, "Chalo, isme we'll work with government organizations, right?" So partly by design and a lot by chance, my entire focus now has been working with government organizations and helping them build the muscle required for them to succeed in digital health. So it sounds like a little abstract, but I'll give you a few examples of what we're doing to kind of make it a little bit clearer. So one of the initiatives we're doing is, cancer is a big problem in India, and there is an entity called Tata Memorial Center, which obviously is very well renowned, but they also have a network which they call the National Cancer Grid. So we have helped create a center for digital oncology. It's a very new center. The MOU got signed only last year. So we just hired the CEO. Now we're hiring the team. But the intent is to create a tech capability inside the National Cancer Grid, because otherwise the National Cancer Grid was really run by doctors, very, very strong, competent doctors. But it's very hard for a doctor to, with the limited amount of time they have, to focus on how do you think about data, how do you think about interoperability, how do you think about electronic patient records, how do you think about so many things, AI and all the buzzwords that you keep on hearing. So moving the needle on technology at the National Cancer Grid was difficult. And it was difficult because it didn't have the technology muscle required to flex. So we are hoping that the center that we are going to create, it's at least a 4 or 5 year journey before we'll start showing serious results, is something that will be a capability that the National Cancer Grid will develop on its own. And the impact of that will be felt by the 300 hospitals which are part of the National Cancer Grid. And between these 300 hospitals, they actually impact 70% of all cancer patients in India, right? So it's like a really long journey, because by the time we put in the effort of creating the center, we hire the team starts to build something, the impact of that on the 300 hospitals, and then the impact will be on the patients is going to take a while. But the good news is that I have plenty of time, so I'm not in rush because I really look at this next phase of my journey as a 10-15 year journey. So I can be very patient, and we talk about patient capital. So I'm not phased out. I'm not looking for quick wins, and I'm just happy to make incremental progress. The NCG team, of course, the NCG team is very motivated, and we're doing time. But these are hard problems, so they will take time to fructify, and the impact of that. Some of the initial things that we have done actually have been very positive. So if you go to the Tata Memorial, the NCG site, you'll see that there's a document that got published about 2 months back, which was cancer requirements for EMRs. So it may sound like, if you're in healthcare and you'll understand the importance of this, globally such a document has not been put together. And this was actually collated through a fairly rigorous effort by a lot of different cancer specialists who have kind of come together to publish a document. Now the creation of the document enables us to evaluate vendors, of which are the good vendors who can do cancer care better than others. We can help vendors, electronic medical record vendors, come up to speed, and so on and so forth. So that is sort of one example. The other example I'll mention is that the dominant quality standard in India in healthcare and hospitals is an entity called NABH. It's a Delhi-based organization. You'll actually, if you go to any of the hospitals, you'll see this triangle logo. So it's quite popular. They have coverage of about 15,000 hospitals, but they were only tracking clinical and administrative practices in hospitals. So about 1.5 years back, we got involved in the foundation. We said that if long-term digital is going to be important in hospitals, then NABH should, again, to use the same words, build a muscle on technology, and you must have a way to create, in the same way as you're auditing a hospital for clinical guidelines, administrative guidelines, how about creating a standard for digital guidelines, because that creates a roadmap for hospitals. So about 3 weeks back, NABH actually published the first draft standard for hospitals in India to against the digital requirements. And now it's open for public commentary, so we've got a lot of commentary. Now we'll go through it. So the actual version will get published 3 months from now. But that in the healthcare space is actually a big deal, because what it does is it creates a roadmap for hospitals to be able to know, okay, if I need to become good in digital, what does it involve? And for good or bad, I'm on the chair of the digital committee, and this standard is targeted to the base level hospital. So it's not targeted at Apollo becoming smarter, or a Max becoming, or even a Tata Memorial becoming smarter, but it's actually targeted mainly to support the needs of 20 bed and 10 bed and 50 bed and 100 bed hospitals, right, across the country. So if you read it, it looks like a really basic document. It doesn't have all the buzzwords that we keep on hearing: IoT, AI, ML, machine learning, all the jazz. Not there in the document, but it has really basic stuff. But that foundational stuff is important. And then we are now going to create an assessor program. And also, each of these things will take 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. But the potential impact of this can be quite large. And I can give you a few more examples, but I'll just pause here. So the intent from my standpoint is, let's work. We do a lot of work with the National Health Authority. Honestly, the Ayushman Bharat Digital Mission program is going to take a lot of pushing and shoving over the next 5-7 years for it to materialize. It's not going to have the pickup of a UPI or a Aadhaar, and there are real reasons. Not that the government is not doing well, but just the nature of the underlying hospital and the clinic ecosystem is such that it is not easy to sell an adapter when you don't. So ABDM is an adapter, right? So how do you sell an adapter when there is nothing to plug into? So India has no ability to plug the adapter into something. So we can keep on asking कि आपने adapter क्यों नहीं बेचा है, मगर वो बेचेंगे किस लिए? आपके पास कोई device ही नहीं है वो plug करने के लिए. So those are the kinds of things that we get involved with. I think the role of patient capital, especially in the kind of work that we do, becomes very important, because if you're going to try and make government organizations successful, and then these are large-scale programs, it takes a lot of time even to have conversations with the stakeholders, then for them to create buy-in, and then to start initiatives. Even to hire good, competent people in digital in the government sector is very hard, because compensation levels are fundamentally different in the outside world and with the government. So how do you attract solid technology people to come and work in the government? Many of them will have to take a 50-70% drop in compensation. So now it's like trying to find a great tech guy in India is very hard, but great tech guy who's willing to take a 50-70% drop in compensation would be even harder. So we just recognize that these are real problems and we'll have to solve for them. So you have to be terribly patient. And I just feel that I'm lucky that I have the time, and to some extent, the initial track record of 18 months has been good. So look forward to the journey. So that is, I just feel blessed that I'm a lot of gratitude that I'm at the right place at the right time with what's happening in India right now. Yeah.
In Act 1 of our mission is to catalyze more startup founders to bring their learnings and expertise running resilient for-profit businesses into the non-profit world. And it could be with their time, money, any other resources, right? And that's something that we are striving to do better each day. So thank you for sharing that. My next question is to Rajesh. So Rajesh, CSR capital has been a big boon to the development sector, and today constitute almost 30% of all the philanthropic capital that's available. But what we've seen is that CSR capital has typically shied away from innovative, risky projects, right? And typically expect an impact story for every dollar spent. So what do you think can be done to kind of bring them over the wall, or convince them, bring them on board to support innovations more? From your vantage point, would love to hear your thoughts.
So, Neetha, thank you so much for the question, and thanks for the opportunity. Neetha put me in a fix when she first introduced the session. She said this is a group of funders and recipients, and I'm stuck. I'm stuck because I am both. And I think probably I'm the only one who's both. And let me, with your permission, take this opportunity to clear the air around that. As Neetha said, United Way Bengaluru has been, been a part of ACT, and we are extremely proud of this partnership which has come about. Where, as Mohit very clearly pointed, when we had a one-on-one conversation in the morning, he said, while we did all that stuff, you guys kept us honest. That's what our job was, just to focus on ensuring that there is compliance, due diligence, everything happening, and trying to keep pace with the decision making of the funders. And you can imagine it's one of the toughest jobs. And that's what we did. But that's not our day job. We are an NGO, and our job is to make sure we connect the corporate CSR grants with needs in the communities. And in doing that, we also implement the projects for the corporates. So that's what we do, which is what is our primary job. So, and the reason why I said Neetha put me in a fix was that because we play both the roles. And it's been 13 years. So for whatever it's worth, it looks that we seem to be doing our job pretty well. So that's specific to the question which Neetha raised. I think one of the points which Mohit in his panel discussion brought out in the very first morning session, I think one of the points which he very emphatically said was, we are proud of the failures and we look at it as an opportunity to learn. And my friend here was proud about the fact that he failed, 18 times? Never mind. Neetha, we can't afford to fail in the corporate CSR. Now, that's one of the fundamental flaws, this whole methodology is. And let me also here clarify. I think CSR is one of the good things that has happened, to this country. The good thing is between 2014 and 2023, it has significantly evolved. And the better thing that is happening is, in the last 2 years, it has actually catapulted the Indian philanthropy to get into the space big time. And that's why you see a lot of people, and ACT is it's a glaring testimony to that, where there is an availability of unrestricted funding. Under corporate CSR, thanks to the laws, there is absolutely no scope for experimenting. In fact, Naghma may be an exception, but I'm going to take complete dependence on my practical experience meeting the various C-level people, whether the CEO or the CFO. Even before the grant is made, in chaste Hindi, सब ठीक हो जाएगा ना, सब खुश हो जाएंगे बाद में, अच्छा वो रिपोर्ट दे देना, ठीक है? All happy faces. It's like a typical Suraj Bajatiya film. And on top of it, you have layered conversation with 7 people, of which 70% of them are compliance and legal. Nobody is connected with the projects and actually what happens. And then the poor CSR resource, trust me, it's not an enviable position to be in. So sympathies and empathies, because it's extremely important. But again, remember, it's very important what that particular job is being done. But to link it with this is going to be a huge problem. I'm assuming that the way things are shaping up, at least in the next 3-4 years, I don't see this can happen. But where it gets very interesting is the fact that if this ecosystem is able to fund these things and come up with those products, I'm sorry for trivializing it, but that is what is picked up there in that space. Then there is a huge opportunity. And that can happen when this particular ecosystem, I'm here referring to ACT type initiatives, which can start funding all these things and then getting fed into the NGO ecosystem, then it can go back to the corporates, where you can probably look at it from an operating this thing, or even kind of scaling it up and all that stuff. Per se, venturing for these adventurism through corporate CSR at this point of time is a no-go.
No, absolutely, Rajesh. So what Madhav was talking about before, right? There are several valleys of death during the product development life cycle. So while people like ACT and IHF can underwrite and de-risk the early stages, once there is a product that is ready for use at a patient bedside, then even then the innovator needs support, right? Yeah. To get real world evidence, to break into the clinical workflow and so on and so forth. That's probably a good
No, no, absolutely. So,
package.
I mean, the opportunity for collaboration is plenty, and this word underwrite is taboo in CSR. So that's just about it. But then, where the gap, one of the gap, Neetha, is I think people like us in United Way Bengaluru, we are privileged because we are exposed to this ecosystem, and people like us can play that catalytic role where we are able to try and get all what Rizwan is working on and other things, and probably provide them this type of market also. I'm not going to say larger market, this avenue of market also, which definitely is going to look for those solutions. So, I think more such of these things need to happen where we are also exposed. The other important aspect I want to touch upon is the fact that technology is here to stay. I think that's no brainer. But one of the challenges which we face in the NGO ecosystem is one, it's not that they are technology averse. The point is access and the cost. The second aspect is going to be the challenge for the NGO system to not able to articulate their needs of technology in their work is another aspect. Now, this is where if there is a possibility of collaboration and something can be worked on. I know there are very few people working on it. And remember, corporates pay a bomb for some of those tech platforms which are there. And I think in the last 6-7 years, what I have seen is at least majority of them have disappeared, which means there's a huge opportunity for us to work on.
Thank you, Rajesh. Next question to Naghma. So, Naghma, as an asset manager of CSRs, Rajesh also called out that you are an exception in your grant making approaches. So, we've also seen that EdelGive has been very creative with the initiatives that you pick up. How do you balance that risk appetite with the kind of impact and discipline that CSRs demand? And how have you managed those stakeholder relationships? Would love to hear.
Thank you. And I can't agree more with Rajesh and the other panelists. But if your life looks like a Surat Barjate movie, mine is clearly doing a Sholay every day. The fact is that, yes, in fact, more than the FCRA money, I think CSR money has requirements, which we don't really talk about. But if I may go back and say, what is the single most defining factor that allows for organizations like us to do our jobs well? It is the senior management buy-in. The difference that a corporate's MD or a chair standing and saying, I want to ensure my CSR does what it should, number one. Second, I will listen to the experts instead of telling them what I want. These two things make a huge difference. So I think that is the gift that I can take no credit for, that I have received from my parent company. What we can take credit for in EdelGive is, yes, with that mandate, going really creative and saying if CSR funds are restrictive and if we want to really do good in the way defined, then what is the meaning of hedging this risk? See, then we have to think of, then all money cannot be the same colored money. That means that the pool that I have should be foundation money and HNI money and CSR money, and a blend of it can do a blend of good. So what we really focus on is, so we are also recipients from many sources and we are also givers to many. So ensuring that different kinds of capital can come together and collectively do good so that we are compliant for all kinds of funds is a real practice that we have. We structure our money like that. On the other side, as far as the giving is concerned, I completely agree. We have to give our funders, we have to give CSRs and HNIs a product to fund. That becomes our job. And while we productize, keeping the dignity of the grassroots work intact, that is also our responsibility. We cannot go to NGOs and productize their work for them. The least that we can do is allow the experts to operate on the field. Because there's just one thing that I find a little problematic in these discussions is that We are going to build capacity. We are going to tell them how to be more efficient. Whether we are startups or we are sorted companies, we're going to go and give them our expertise. But the fact is, these two worlds are different at very different things. Like the corporate world has its tech, HR, systems, processes, leadership in order. You have a very different caliber that's going on in the grassroots. Limited resources, social issues, working in risk, working in conflict. These are things that we get trained for in corporate. Matlab 2 days workshop in risk management. That's what is happening inherently in the field. As soon as we realize that different stakeholders have different strengths, and the people like me, people like Rajesh, have a responsibility to curate this pathway between givers and receivers in a way that both get what they want, there is compliance, and there is a win-win on all sides, is something that organizations like EdelGive do, and yours as well. While this may sound really neat and clean, yes, we just have to make these great pathways. We have to take money from here, give there, sabko report milega. It's a nightmare to operate on. But it's a nightmare we have bought in for. See, like everybody's got their work cut out for it. It is work that we have acknowledged is going to be difficult, gotten into, eyes wide open. And so has our parent company. So I think the difference between being able to pull off something or not, it is not about how difficult the task is. It's about whether your stakeholders are backing you. And that's what we've got. And I think that's what we need to encourage in the CSR world. The fact is the entire approval system. The grant manager is this mid-level employee of the company, very close to the grant, getting the best of the. They have to make a report that will go to the head of CSR, that will then go to the board meeting, that will then be approved by someone who's never seen this community before. It's 4 levels of distance, right? So inherently, the approval structure in CSR also is not cohesive. It's not conducive to this. So I think what's happened today in the morning session is a very, very important event, where you have leaders sitting right on top, sitting on the pinnacle of capital, actually saying we need to do better with the money we have. It has to begin there. Otherwise, monies will not flow.
Thanks, thanks for that, Naghma. So, what do you think we can do as a community to bring about that conversation, right, with senior leaders at corporates about the power of innovation that can shift some of that thinking, which may help more CSR funds to come into tech innovations?
See, I don't think people don't know. Like, how many of us are surprised by this today? How many of us think that money should not do better, or that, a startups ecosystem have a lot to give? Everyone knows unconsciously, and today is consciously accepting. So there's a place for talk and there's a place for walk. Okay, so let's bring people together in convenings like this and discuss. Finally, somebody's got to make the tools. Somebody's going to structure the conversation. We've pulled off a grow, all right? We've pulled off a grow which has brought 100 NGOs together, gotten 30 funders together, and said 100 will get the same grant through one evaluation process. Everyone get the same report. Each thing that I've said took incredible amount of stakeholder management. That's what I mean, that after a point, we can keep agreeing with each other. But somewhere we have to create mechanisms to work together. And that also needs funding, right? Somebody's paying my salary, no? And somebody's paying for EdelGive also. And that needs to be factored in. Innovation doesn't come free. Innovation has to be supported. And innovation is supported by admin costs, chai, coffee, salary, people's laptops, data, phone. This is what innovation costs. This is what grassroots work costs. So while we all very enamored by the social change that is possible, we need to understand funding social change is not romantic at all. We need to sober that down and see what line items look like and say, yes, I pay for this.
Thank you. We'll next move to Sanjay Sarin and Sanjay Vijayakumar, who are both recipients of grant capital. So my first question is to Sanjay Sarin. So Sanjay, finds work globally is supported by multiple multilaterals or sovereign wealth funds, global foundations, and so on. And your work also cuts across different streams, right, in diagnostics, biobanks, and digital health, and so on and so forth. Can you talk a little bit about the need for philanthropic capital or what you've seen in the global market? And how does that compare to the trends seen in India? And how would you like the landscape to evolve in future? And then a follow on from that would be that today a lot of commercial capital is not available for diagnostics because there's a little bit of hesitancy or lack of knowledge to understand the science behind some of these diagnostic innovations, right? Is there a role that philanthropic capital can play to de-risk some of these innovations in diagnostics so that the commercial adoption would be quicker and more seamless?
So thanks, Neetha, for those questions. So to your first question, so I think philanthropy definitely, globally plays a very important role. And I think I read, nearly $46 billion were contributed by philanthropic foundations into the global health space, which is almost 25% of the grant capital that has been deployed. And this has gone towards, social reforms within the health space, purchase of medical equipment, and infrastructure upgradation and all of that. Of this 46 billion, nearly, I would say 12 to 15% comes from about 8 global foundations, and 72% of this money is being deployed in North America, only about 5% in the Asia Pacific. So I don't have statistics for India, but just to say that there is a lot to be done as far as philanthropy in India is concerned. So pivoting a little bit to your question, to what extent does philanthropy contribute towards diagnostic R&D or actual product development? So we've been in this business for about 20 years now. We are incidentally celebrating our 20 years this year. So there was this recent report which came from an organization called G-Finder, and I think they published their reports on the funding landscapes as far as global health, and particularly R&D is concerned. So first of all, there is a massive gap as far as diagnostic R&D space is concerned. So I think the 2020 report says that around $3.8 billion was contributed by various funders, and this is public health, government, includes philanthropies, private sector, and all of that. So out of this 3.8 billion, about 725 million, only 725 million came from philanthropic foundations. And out of that 725 million, I think there were probably 1 or 2 who contributed the lion's share. So the long story short on this is that that there is very little that is happening from a philanthropy standpoint as far as contribution towards diagnostic R&D is concerned. And I think some of the points have been raised by my fellow panelists. I think Rajesh spoke about there's nothing called underwriting or de-risking as far as deployment of the CSR capital is concerned, and you obviously already want a report even before the funding has been deployed. I think diagnostic R&D is a high-risk space, and it is absolutely important for the philanthropists to be able to come in and de-risk. There's an opportunity to be able to de-risk that space. But I think there is stuff that needs to be done on the other side also. I think it is very important for the developers and then even people like us, and I see Neeraj is also here from PATH, for us to be able to have those conversations in forums like this to sort of, make the funders understand that what are the real risks involved. Fine to a certain extent, and I think we raise our own funds, as you said, from a lot of international governments. I think as far as our funding is concerned, probably less than 0.5% comes from any sovereign wealth fund or any kind of a philanthropy foundation. But to say that there is a real opportunity here for the philanthropists, it is very critical to have those conversations into what will it take, for a CSR capital or philanthropic capital to fund diagnostic innovation or, innovation in therapeutics or vaccines? There are a lot of conversations happening right now, even under the presidency of the G20 of India. And I think, in fact, there is the second priority, which typically focuses around creating a sustainable framework for manufacturing of medical countermeasures, which is around vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics. I think I'll speak particularly about diagnostics. And I think the one good thing, probably the only silver lining as far as the COVID cloud is concerned, is the unprecedented focus on diagnostics. I think almost everyone in this room probably has heard PCR or a rapid antigen test, RAT, as we used to call it. We're obviously a slightly different, class of people, but then even when our drivers and our grandmothers and grandfathers, everyone came to know, diagnostics really was shown to be the first line of defense. But then it took a lot of, efforts to be able to, make sure that these tests were made available in a record time. God forbid we have another pandemic. There are already, for example, missions like the 100-day mission, which are being put into place by organizations like FIND and CEPI, wherein how do you prep in the first 100 days to make what is a basic diagnostic that is needed in order to counter the, or manage a pandemic of such proportions. I think the pandemic also sort of brutally exposed the fragility of the supply chains. If you look at diagnostics, I think all of us experienced that we had to wait on days at end in order to get a PCR test done. That is because there was, almost everyone, including the high-income countries, everyone was dependent on a very limited set of manufacturers for the availability of these diagnostic goods. So I think that clearly points towards the need that, India probably was one of the few countries that was able to pivot quickly, and, there was a lot of PCR test kits as well as rapid test kits which were manufactured in India. The government took a lot of initiative there. But then there is a lot which needs to be done in this space, and it is very important and a real opportunity for the philanthropic capital to step in here. But at the same time, in terms of educating the philanthropists and the funders in this space, and I think Madhav would probably agree with me, is that sometimes the moment you look at a diagnostic product, it looks extremely desirable, really sexy. This is what I need, right? But then if you dig deeper, you really need to do the due diligence on the product, on the developer, on the science, and then more importantly, that's those valleys of death that you alluded to and Madhav spoke about. Is that, from concept to prototype, from prototype to something that has been commercially validated. And then more importantly, I think Rajesh made the point about access and cost, is that what is the access pathway for that product? How are you going to take that product to the people who need them the most, whether it is the communities or the primary healthcare centers or whatnot? I think that's the due diligence that needs to be done in order to present a business case, if I may, to a funder in the private sector. So I think unless that work happens, it is going to be continually challenging to be able to raise funds around diagnostic development from the CSR space or philanthropy, if you may. So I think that was probably the answer to the first question. And coming to your second question in terms of, and I was just doing some research. I think I take these opportunities around panels to do some research. So I understand, and I may be wrong. There are others in this room and on the panel who probably knows better than me. I think there's about $250 trillion which is currently parked in the capital markets. Only about $2.5 trillion is needed to meet the sustainable development gap, which is about 1%. Easier said than done, though. But there are a lot of financing mechanisms that that are currently into play. Including there's a lot of thinking around blended finance in terms of the private sector and the public sector coming. There was a recent study that was published. They've done a study of about 72 blended finance models, and it was shown that these private funders, they were able to pull about $4.1 for every $1 of the public health that was invested. So just to say that there is an opportunity here for the capital to be unlocked, but there are obviously innovative financing mechanisms that need to be put into place. And I think the thing which I said earlier on as an answer to your first question in terms of doing all of that due diligence, like we would go and present a case to our management. Typically R&D dollars are always harder to find. I come from the private sector, are always harder to find. You will always invest more money in sales and sales force and whatnot. I think R&D dollars are always hard to fund. So it's very, critical that you make that business case solid when you're presenting it to an internal stakeholder or to an external stakeholder, be it a CSR funder, be it a capital market or a sovereign wealth fund or whatnot. So yeah, I'll pause there.
With the epidemiological shift and with the shift in trends from malnutrition to lifestyle disorders and aging population, and even increasing insurance coverage, I think all of this points to a much bigger market in diagnostics. And as an ecosystem, it'll be great for us to think of, how to set up our innovators for success. Thank you for that. Thank you for your perspective. Next question to Sanjay Vijayakumar. So Sanjay, as a CEO of an impact-first commercial enterprise and as a serial entrepreneur, you have experience raising capital from non-profit, for-profit, all kinds of funders, right? So can you tell us a little bit about what grants have played in your journey at Pupil First and Corona Safe? And when you raise money from impact first funders and commercial investors, do they pull you in different directions? Us asking for impact and the commercial funders pushing you towards sustainability, commercialization, and so on. And also talk to us a little bit about your experience working with global and local philanthropists.
Okay, so good afternoon to all of you, right? See, I think my perspective about capital itself has evolved, ever since I first raised capital, I think by, when I was in college, like it was an undergrad in college, right? It was many years back. Today, my understanding of capital is that it's a shared reality. Like it's not as true as the air we breathe or the sun that shines, right? It's a story that everybody believes to be true, and so it is true, just like nation states or religions, right? So it's a shared perspective everybody carries that this thing exists, right? My experience on this has changed over the years, right? When I was in college, my mom and dad, belonged to a middle class family. They worked for like 40 years and saved 40 lakhs. And I was in third year undergrad when I raised my first round of funding, which was 80 lakhs. And it was a very different experience. I met an NRI who came and met me. We had lunch and he wrote a check. And I asked him, so why did you fund? And he's like, I was like this when I was your age. And that's it. That's the reason, right? It changed subsequently as an entrepreneurial journey went ahead to venture capital. Whole different world. Like totally different world, extremely fast growth and all of that, right? And then it changed to my first experience with grants. This was in building an incubator called Startup Village. It was a very unique experience because the central government gave grants. Different idea. They're saying, we think this needs to exist, but here is the framework and don't do anything beyond this. And you can't change anything, right? So that's there. But because the central government gave grants, we were able to get one of the Infosys founders, Chris Gopalakrishnan, to back it with another grant, right? And because credibility now comes with both like large players, we had other dollar billionaires in the state of Kerala write checks. Right? But then I quickly realized it's very hard to build an NGO and make it commercially sustainable. That's like especially if you're solving for structural changes in society, it's going to be like tons and tons of experiments and you'll fail. And by the time you figure out how it works, sustainability can't be figured out during the same time. It's hard to figure out both these equations at the same time, right? And Chris told me one thing, this was many years back. He said, the total grant capital available in the country is so small, all the billionaires are funding each other's foundations, right? So I'm funding his, he's funding mine, we're all moving money between each other, right? This was many years back though, right? Things have changed a lot, right? And he was the one who advised me saying, if the mission is very true and valuable, and we were solving for quality of education, right? Maybe you need a third model, okay? Let's go with grants and equity, okay? Because by design of this shared reality, capital requires an yield or an interest in whatever format. It needs it, right? Unless you are the generous person giving it away, right? So there's a need for this thing to work. So let's maybe mix both. So the next iteration of my experience came by running for-profit, but carrying the purpose of like a systemic change. Capital came from individuals who were patient. So it's like private individuals, but they're patient, right? And it comes in the form of equity. And when we were going through the journey, COVID happened and we met ACT. And ACT has been like a phenomenal new experience in this whole chapters, right? Each of these experiences has been different, right? So things I noticed, which I had not noticed before with ACT was, one, it was fast. Like, my God, it was mind-blowing, right? We met at 7:30, 8 o'clock an email comes saying, boys, you're in. Where do you wire the money? And we're like, okay, where do we wire the money? Where do we get the money, right? So United Way helped us big time there, right? And the second most important thing is that ACT held context. Okay. Like, I have not met Neetha, ever before today, right? And we've been, playing this, whatever things that we've been building out there, right? For the last 120 weeks plus, right? So if you're extremely well aligned in purpose, right, then the form of capital doesn't matter. Somehow it figures its ways out and builds like a solution and it moves forward. And it is not difficult, extremely difficult in today's day and age to hold context, right? It's very difficult. ACT as an organization held context. I'm like, wow, this is great, right? And because ACT came with a lot of credibility, we met other founders, and that's the experience I had during that phase of time with global funders. We got an email. It looked like spam. It looked like spam, I didn't even respond to it. Right? It's like an email that comes saying, we are Schmidt Futures. We've seen your work. We would like to fund it. I'm like, in the middle of COVID, somebody's pulling the Nigerian scam once again. Like, who would want us to give you won the lottery ticket, here is the money, like send me the account. I'm like, dude, what are you doing? And, a day or two they called us and they said, no, we are like the Eric Schmidt Futures. Our chairman was the chairman of Google. Right? And that was a totally new experience, right? There was no proposal. Okay. So the model that worked, which was very interesting, I've never seen that model before. Somebody finds you, they do all the work. There's an internal guy who does all the work. They talk to you and that is it. You don't even write it, right? They talk to you. This person makes an internal pitch inside the IC, saying, I am the believer, I have verified this thing works, here is the reasoning, right? And when they send that note to me, I'm like, in no way I'll be able to explain the same thing in that format they've written. It's like so structurally crisp and, it's like a great experience. And then Schmidt Futures does something else, along with wiring the money, again, with United Way Bangalore, right? They did something outstanding, right? There was this other multinational corporation, which was thinking and should I write or not write and all of that. The Schmidt Futures guys, they sent us an email saying, please inform the CEO of this particular MNC that we are writing this check to move you into action. I'm like, wow. But, and I sent a message to the CEO of the company and then they immediately act, right? And this act, right, where you have the ability to what I now come to realize as conscious capital. Okay, the form doesn't matter. Capital by its very nature is blind. We can keep money here and it will just sit here. It's blind. The steward of the capital, the holder of the capital, right, is that person conscious? And if that person is conscious, everything else can be figured out. The sustainability angle, how do you work around this? Okay, I need a yield, so I need a return. And, in the shared reality, we all work and it needs to be sustainable. It can't keep, getting cash in, right? It needs to have a business model. All of those realities have to merge in. And to my mind, Neetha, when I compare this whole experience, right, up to this very moment, and if I sum all of it, right, I feel as an organization, a living organism, ACT represents that sort of conscious capital. And, I hope all of you guys have more power. You're able to run the summits for many, many years to come. And you're just starting off like one big, massive social change, and you really bring your charter to life. That's my take on this.
Sanjay, for that vote of confidence. So I realize we are close to time, and a lot of interesting perspectives emerging. But the bottom line is that philanthropic capital has to do so much more to unleash our innovations. But the last question that I want to seed both to our panelists and to the audience here is that here within in this room we have the universe, right? Or rather the representatives of the universe of funders and recipients. Any thoughts and ideas on how this ecosystem can collaborate better for better shared outcomes? Are there any models or any experiences that you've had of successes which can be scaled up? Anyone in the audience or in the panel who wants to share before we wind up?
Hi, my name is Badal Malik. I'm a co-founder of a company called Karma Life. We're a financial platform for low-income workers. So we built a model around earnings-linked finance, liquidity, as well as savings and investment-like solutions for, India's 200 million plus organized blue-collar workforce. And if you bring the unorganized, then we're talking 450 million plus. So it's a massive, massive opportunity and need. I was going to say that, credit, fintech, credit. There's a lot going on, but where we feel that there is a very strong need for sustainable models of credit that is given in a productive way and protects against over indebtedness. Our whole business model, our philosophy has been built around that, right? So for example, it's a life cycle approach where we build in a subscription type model, and it's a recurring product rather than a transactional product that is once and done, and we're just trying to drive or push through a loan. So again, coming back to where capital can help, we've built the model. We work with employers and aggregators of workforces. We underwrite based on work data that we receive. We've cracked that whole ingestion of work data issue. Our repayment is tapped from the platform payout to the worker. So that works in terms of the basics, but there are many use cases on the margins that we have been kind of hemorrhaged from being able to explore as quickly as we'd like to, because those are risky. There is a learning cost involved, and our traditional partners, say NBFCs, don't have the risk appetite or are too conservative in their approach. And so something like a credit, risk guarantee, right, which is there on paper, but I've never seen anything that has practically existed for, an entity like ours to leverage quickly and fairly easily and scale or try new things, experiment, learn, validate, and then, kind of build the demonstration effect for others to take, for the mainstream funders to take over. And I'm just wondering, that seems to me like a very basic lacuna that, it's a very smart, simple construct, but it just does not exist. So I'm just wondering if there are any ideas around how something like that. And I'll give you a specific example. So for example, we do earned wage access, right, which is where we underwrite on the basis of accrued earnings in the middle of a earnings period cycle. We can extend that model to micro entrepreneurs by giving them an as easy line of credit, which would be going beyond the accrued earnings, which means there's more risk, right? But it can boost their earnings. It can boost their ability to invest that money in productive assets and boost their earnings. But again, it's hard to find takers.
As philanthropists, I've been, while my sort of formal journey started a year and a half back, we've been doing as a foundation for the last 7 years. And one of the challenging things for me when I've interacted with a whole bunch of organizations in the social sector is to figure out what is really sort of the value add. Okay. So let me give you an example. See, whether you are a corporate running a CSR program, or you're a philanthropist, you become a philanthropist because you probably run a company or you've done something in the business side of things where you made money and now you want to sort of contribute back. The finance function is fairly well defined. So there is a concept of a P&L, there's a concept of a balance sheet. And today, you can go to any venture capitalist in working in a certain sector, venture capitalist investing in SaaS companies, or a private equity guy focusing on IT services or other manufacturing or whatever. And each industry, in a sense, has a way to represent their financials. So looking at, if I was a VC and somebody walked into the door and say, okay, I've got the SaaS product, the first thing I'll say, okay, now show me what your financials are. And the industry has evolved where every SaaS company is expected to present information in a certain way. If you're an IT services company or you're a company in manufacturing, then you're supposed to, if you're a bank or you're a credit card company, you're a company in insurance, each industry has a certain set of key performance indicators. It's got a certain way of sharing information so that the consumer of that information becomes very easy. I could be a SaaS guy and I could look at the projections, and within 10 minutes, even without the guy saying anything about his company, I know ye mere ko interest hai ki nahi hai, right? In some ways, okay? With every not-for-profit or a social enterprise, you have to dig that information. Because usually if it's a 1-hour meeting, then the first 45, 50 minutes of the meeting is just talking about anecdotal examples. Let me share a picture of this mother and this is what happened, and this child and this is what happened. And I, as a prospective investor, I'm saying, boss, aapka P&L or balance sheet equivalent document kidhar hai, And 8 out of 10 NGOs have never constructed one. If you ask them a simple question, boss, what are your 3 principal performance indicators, and just show me how your data is, you've been in business for 10 years, right? What are the 3 KPIs that you measure? I don't know how many NGOs can actually give me that information. At least the ones I've interacted with, I work with also have struggled to give me that information. So one thing that ACT could do, as guidance, is because every member in ACT is a financially savvy individual and organization. If there is a way to help the social sector, just define templates that become commonplace to be used in the social sector, it will just improve the communication of information between the funding entities. It could be a philanthropist, it could be a corporate, and the recipient. It's just a really hard, laborious conversation to find NGOs, because वो हर NGO का अलग story सुनना पड़ता है, फिर ये करना पड़ता है, वो करना पड़ता है, फिर उसके बाद you have to like suck out information to really get to it. But if you go to a company that is a SaaS company, you ask, show me data on your unit economics. Everybody knows how to demonstrate unit economics thing. And if you don't have the data, you probably won't even walk into my door, so you won't waste my time, right? So I think we are missing the templates, the equivalent of a P&L and balance sheet. Of course, the metrics will be different, like in every industry is different. So if you're a mother and child NGO, the metrics could be different. The good thing about social sector is not like 100 sectors, right? You could be in agriculture, you could be in supporting something in education, you could be doing something, whatever. So for each of these different, say, top 8, 10 themes around which we are looking to make progress, if we can start to define what metrics need to get reported and how the information sharing has to happen, it will make it much easier for transaction to happen. Otherwise, can you imagine what would be the effort required for every VC to make a funding, or a private equity guy to make? It would be really slow. Today we are at a point where some of I hear so many of my sort of anecdotal examples. We met the VC on Wednesday. On Thursday, Friday, they sent us an initial version of a term sheet, and in 2 weeks we actually got funded, you can't do that in the not-for-profit sector simply because the maturity doesn't exist. So ACT can play an important role there.
That's a great nudge, Rizwan. We've been quite diligent about the M&E for our own grants and the grants we make, but this is definitely something that we can, of course, absolutely. And this can be the next leg in the next kind of how we can take this to the next level. We are over time, and thank you so much for being a wonderful panel and a wonderful audience. Thank you so much.